Commander Vextar stood at the front of his office looking out at the stars through the large window. His crystalline skin caught the light from the distant suns and made small rainbows on the wall behind him. The Galactic Military Academy on Nexus Prime Station was his responsibility, and right now he had a big problem. The cadets were not paying attention in class. They slept during lectures about space combat tactics. They talked during lessons about alien diplomacy. Some even played games on their personal devices when instructors explained how to survive on hostile planets. This could not continue. Vextar had tried everything. He gave them extra training exercises. He made them clean the entire station with tiny brushes. He even took away their recreation time. Nothing worked. The young beings from dozens of different worlds just did not seem to care about their military education. Yesterday he had watched, security footage of Captain Morris trying to teach a class about supply chain management during long space missions. Half the Aquarian cadets were literally sleeping with their gills barely moving. The proud Centaurian bird people were preening their feathers instead of taking notes. Even the logical Tecton robots seemed to have dimmed their optical sensors in what could only be described as boredom. Something had to change. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and these future officers needed to be sharp and alert. Vextar had heard about ancient Earth military training where drill sergeants would shout and intimidate recruits to keep them focused. But shouting did not work on all alien species. Some Aquarians actually fell asleep faster when exposed to loud noises. Centaurians considered shouting to be a form of music and found it relaxing. Then Vextar remembered something from his own military training. On the harsh world of Zephyr Prime, his instructors had used fear to keep students alert. Not fear of punishment, but fear of real danger. They had brought wild crystal scorpions into the classroom. The deadly creatures had crawled around the room while lessons continued. No cadet had ever fallen asleep with a creature that could kill them in seconds just a few feet away. The idea was perfect. Vextar contacted his old friend Grix, who worked as an exotic animal trainer on the mining world of Korthal. Grix had access to creatures from the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Creatures that would make any sane being stay wide awake and pay attention. 2 weeks later, Grix arrived at the academy with a transport container that made strange rumbling sounds. Inside was a shadow maw from the death world of Kethmore. The creature was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. It stood 4 feet tall at the shoulder with muscles that rippled under midnight black fur. Its eyes glowed amber in the dim light and seemed to see right through anyone who looked at them. When it opened its mouth, the teeth were like curved daggers designed to tear through the toughest armor. Grix explained how dangerous the creature was as they moved it to a secure holding area. Shadow maws were apex predators on their homeworld where even the plants tried to kill anything that moved. They could sense fear and aggression from great distances. Their claws could cut through starship hull plating. Most importantly, they were intelligent enough to understand that other beings feared them, and they used that fear as a weapon. The plan was simple. During the next tactical lecture, they would bring the shadow maw into the classroom on a reinforced titanium chain. The creature would prowl around the room while the instructor taught the lesson. The cadets would be so afraid of the dangerous predator that they would have no choice but to stay alert and focused. Vextar selected a mixed class of 24 cadets from different species. There were 6 Aquarians with their blue-green scales and large gill slits. 5 Centaurians with colorful feathers and sharp beaks sat in the back row. 4 Tectons had positioned themselves near the door with their metallic bodies gleaming under the classroom lights. Various other species filled the remaining seats, including 2 insectoid Vrix and 3 plant-like Chlorians. In the middle of the third row sat the Academy's first human exchange student. Jake Collins had arrived from Earth just 2 months ago as part of a new diplomatic program. The humans were still new to galactic society, and most species found them strange and unpredictable. They looked harmless enough with their soft pink skin and small teeth, but there were disturbing reports from trade stations about human behavior that made no logical sense. Humans had been seen trying to pet wild Zarian hunting beasts that could bite off limbs. They offered food to Corvian scavenger birds that were known to attack in swarms. Most puzzling of all, humans seemed to form emotional attachments to creatures that any rational being would avoid. The other cadets whispered about the human student, but Jake Collins seemed friendly and harmless. Enough! Commander Vextar entered the classroom, followed by 2 security guards, and Grix holding the heavy chain attached to the shadow maw. The alien cadets immediately recognized the danger. Aquarian gills fluttered rapidly in panic. Centaurian feathers stood straight up in alarm. Tecton optical sensors dimmed to protect their sensitive circuits. The fear scent in the room was so strong that Vextar could taste it in the air. The shadow maw lifted its massive head and breathed deeply through flared nostrils. Its amber eyes scanned the room slowly, taking in every terrified face. This was exactly what it had evolved to do: find frightened prey and hunt them down. The creature's muscles tensed as it prepared to use the fear of these young beings to fuel its own predatory instincts. Grix secured the chain to a heavy mounting point near the instructor's podium. The shadow maw tested the strength of its bonds with a casual pull that made the entire wall vibrate. Satisfied that it could not break free but could still move around most of the room, the creature began its prowl. Captain Morris began his lecture on resource management during extended space missions. His voice shook slightly as the massive predator walked past his desk. Every cadet in the room was now paying perfect attention. Their eyes followed the shadow maw as it moved between the rows of seats like death itself taking a casual stroll. This was going to work perfectly. The fear in the room was so thick that even Vextar felt his own survival instincts activate. No cadet would dare fall asleep or stop paying attention with a creature like this watching them. The new teaching method would solve all their discipline problems. The shadow maw moved through the classroom like a living shadow made of muscle and death. Its padded paws made no sound on the metal floor, but every step sent vibrations through the room that the cadets could feel in their bones. The creature's amber eyes swept across each row of seats, cataloging every frightened face and rapid heartbeat. Captain Morris tried to continue his lecture about supply chains and resource allocation, but his voice kept cracking when the massive predator walked too close to his podium. The Aquarian cadets had pressed themselves as far back in their seats as possible, with their gill slits opening and closing in rapid panic breathing. One young Aquarian named Reef had actually started to change color from blue-green to a pale yellow, which was a clear sign of extreme terror. The Centaurian students had all their feathers standing at full alert, making them look twice their normal size. Their sharp beaks clicked nervously as the shadow maw approached their section of the room. Commander Vextar nodded with satisfaction as he watched from the back corner. This was exactly the response he had wanted. Pure focused attention born from the knowledge that death was walking among them. The Tecton robots had dimmed their optical sensors to minimum power and locked their joints in defensive positions. Their logical processors were calculating escape routes and survival probabilities at maximum speed. Even beings made of metal and circuits understood that the creature prowling the room could tear them apart without effort. But when the shadow maw reached the third row, something completely unexpected happened. Jake Collins, the human exchange student, did not cower in fear like the others. Instead, his face lit up with what could only be described as pure joy. His eyes widened with excitement and a huge smile spread across his face. "Oh, wow," Jake said in a voice loud enough for half the class to hear. "It's like a giant space cat." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Every alien cadet in the room turned to stare at the human with expressions of complete disbelief. Captain Morris stopped talking mid-sentence about cargo container efficiency. Even Commander Vextar felt his crystalline features shift in confusion. The shadow maw froze in place directly in front of Jake's desk. Its massive head turned to focus, both glowing amber eyes on this strange creature that was not afraid. The predator's sensitive nose twitched as it tried to identify the scent coming from the human. There was no fear smell, no panic pheromones, no stress hormones flooding the air. Instead, there was something the shadow maw had never encountered before. Jake leaned forward in his seat to get a better look at the magnificent creature. "Look at those eyes," he whispered to himself. "They're beautiful." The shadow maw tilted its head to one side in a gesture that was almost curious. It had been bred and trained to hunt creatures that ran or cowered or fought back in desperation. This human was doing none of those things. The predator's instincts were confused by prey that showed no fear, and actually seemed pleased to see it. Grix, the trainer, noticed the change in his creature's behavior immediately. In 30 years of working with dangerous animals, he had never seen a shadow maw react this way. The beast looked puzzled rather than predatory. Its hunting stance had relaxed into something more like cautious interest. Jake slowly reached out his right hand toward the shadow maw, keeping his movements gentle and non-threatening. The other cadets gasped in horror, thinking they were about to witness their classmate lose his arm to razor-sharp teeth. But Jake's voice remained calm and friendly as he spoke to the creature. "Hey there, beautiful," he said softly. "You're magnificent, aren't you?" The Shadow Maw leaned forward to sniff Jake's extended hand. Its wet nose touched the human's palm, and Jake felt the creature's warm breath on his fingers. Instead of the fear scent it expected, the predator detected something entirely different. The human smelled of calm acceptance and what could only be described as affection. Then something impossible happened. A deep rumbling sound began to emerge from the Shadow Maw's chest. It started as a low vibration that could be felt more than heard, but quickly grew into a sound that filled the entire classroom. The creature was purring. A Shadow Maw, one of the most feared predators in the galaxy, was purring like a contented house pet. Jake's smile grew even wider as he recognized the sound. "You're just a big kitty, aren't you?" he said as he carefully moved his hand to scratch behind one of the creature's pointed ears. The purring got louder and the Shadow Maw actually leaned into the touch. Captain Morris had completely stopped his lecture and stood frozen behind his podium. Commander Vexistar stepped forward from the back of the room, his crystalline features reflecting the classroom lights in confused patterns. The security guards raised their weapons, thinking something had gone wrong with the creature's conditioning, but Grix held up a hand to stop them. His experienced eyes could see that the Shadow Maw was not malfunctioning or sick. The creature was genuinely relaxed and content. Something about this human had completely disarmed its predatory nature. The trainer had seen domesticated animals react this way to their favorite humans, but never a wild Shadow Maw. The other cadets watched in stunned silence as Jake found the perfect spot behind the creature's left ear. The Shadow Maw's purring reached a volume that made the metal desks vibrate. Its amber eyes half closed in pleasure as the human's gentle fingers worked through its thick fur. "This is impossible," whispered Reef, the young Aquarian whose color had started to return to normal blue-green. "Humans are supposed to be prey animals. How is it not eating him?" One of the Centaurian cadets named Swift clicked her beak thoughtfully. "Maybe humans are predators too," she suggested. "Maybe the Shadow Maw recognizes a fellow hunter." But the Tecton student designated Unit 7 processed the situation with mechanical logic. "Negative," it stated in its flat electronic voice. "Human physiology indicates omnivore adaptation, not apex predator specialization. This behavior pattern does not compute with known data." Jake seemed completely unaware of the chaos his actions were causing among his classmates. He was focused entirely on the magnificent creature before him, treating it like a beloved pet rather than a deadly predator. His other hand joined the first as he scratched both sides of the Shadow Maw's massive head. The creature's response was immediate and dramatic. It began to circle in front of Jake's desk like a giant cat getting ready to settle down for a nap. The heavy chain attached to its collar dragged across the floor, making scraping sounds on the metal surface. Commander Vextar realized his perfect plan for keeping cadets alert was falling apart. Instead of creating an atmosphere of controlled fear, he now had a supposedly dangerous predator acting like someone's pet. The other instructors who had been watching through security cameras were probably having similar thoughts. The Shadow Maw completed its second circle in front of Jake's desk and then did something that made every being in the room question their understanding of reality. The massive predator lowered itself to the floor with the fluid grace of liquid shadow and settled its enormous bulk right beside the human's chair. Its great head came to rest against Jake's leg with a contented sigh that sounded like distant thunder. Jake looked down at the creature with pure delight and continued scratching behind its ears. "That's right," he murmured in a voice so gentle it was barely audible. "Just relax, big guy." The purring continued at a volume that made the classroom walls vibrate slightly. Within moments, the sound took on a deeper, more rhythmic quality. The Shadow Maw was falling asleep. A creature bred for hunting and killing was curling up next to a human student like an oversized house cat, ready for an afternoon nap. "Captain." Morris stood behind his podium holding his datapad but making no attempt to continue the lecture. His mouth hung open as he watched the impossible scene before him. The lesson about supply chain management suddenly seemed completely irrelevant when faced with a reality that defied everything he knew about dangerous predators. Commander Vextar moved closer to observe the phenomenon from a better angle. His crystalline features shifted through different patterns of light as his brain tried to process what he was seeing. The Shadow Maw's breathing had already settled into the slow, deep rhythm of genuine sleep. Its massive ribcage rose and fell peacefully while Jake's Gentle hands continued their soothing motions through the creature's thick fur. The other cadets remained frozen in their seats, afraid to move or make any sound that might disturb the sleeping predator. But their fear was gradually being replaced by curiosity and amazement. Reef, the young Aquarian, had stopped his panic breathing, and his gills moved normally as he watched the human work what appeared to be magic on the galaxy's most feared creature. Swift, the Centaurian cadet, had lowered her alert feathers and tilted her head in the way her species did when encountering something completely new.
"How is this possible?" she whispered to her neighbor. "My people have legends about shadow maws."
They are supposed to be unstoppable killing machines. Unit 7. The Tecton was running continuous scans on both the human and the shadow maw, trying to find some logical explanation for what it was witnessing. Shadow maw vital signs indicate genuine relaxation state, it reported quietly. Heart rate decreased 40%. Stress hormone levels minimal. Brainwave patterns consistent with natural sleep cycle. Grix, the trainer, moved carefully around the classroom to get a better view of his creature. In 3 decades of working with dangerous animals from across the galaxy, he had never seen anything like this. The shadow maw wasn't just calm, it was completely trusting. The beast had positioned itself in a vulnerable sleeping position next to a potential threat, which went against every survival instinct it possessed. "This changes everything," Grix whispered to Commander Vextar. "I've trained hundreds of predators and none of them have ever reacted to another species this way. It's like the human speaks their language." Jake seemed completely unaware of the scientific impossibility of his situation. He had shifted in his chair to better accommodate the shadow maw's head against his leg and continued his gentle scratching motions. His face showed nothing but peaceful contentment, as if sitting next to a sleeping apex predator was the most natural thing in the universe. The creature's purring had settled into a steady rumble that was actually quite soothing once the initial shock wore off. Some of the alien cadets found their own stress levels decreasing as they listened to the rhythmic sound. The shadow maw's obvious contentment was somehow contagious, affecting the entire room's atmosphere. Dr. Lisa Grant rushed into the classroom, having been summoned by emergency communication from Commander Vextar. The human xenobiologist took one look at the scene and immediately pulled out her scanning equipment. As the only other human on the station, she was the Academy's expert on human behavior and psychology. "Incredible," she breathed as she took readings from both Jake and the shadow maw. "The creature's biochemistry has completely shifted. Stress hormones are almost undetectable. It's producing the same neurochemicals associated with pack bonding and family recognition." Commander Vextar's confusion deepened. "Pack bonding?" he asked. "Are you suggesting the shadow maw sees this human as family?" Dr. Grant nodded while checking her scanner readings. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. Humans have a unique evolutionary history. We developed as both predators and prey depending on the situation. But more importantly, we evolved complex social bonding mechanisms that allowed us to form alliances with other species, including potential competitors." She gestured toward Jake, who was now humming softly to the sleeping shadow maw. "Humans domesticated wolves into dogs. We turned wildcats into house pets. We even formed working relationships with dolphins and elephants. Our species has a gift for communicating non-threatening intentions in ways that other species recognize on an instinctual level." The shadow maw's breathing had become so deep and regular that its massive ribcage looked like a slowly rising and falling mountain. Its claws had retracted completely and its facial muscles had relaxed into an expression that could only be described as peaceful happiness. One huge paw twitched slightly as if the creature was dreaming about something pleasant. Jake noticed the movement and smiled. "What are you dreaming about, big guy?" he asked quietly. "Chasing space mice." The gentle joke made several alien cadets actually chuckle despite their lingering nervousness. The tension in the room continued to decrease as everyone adjusted to this new reality. The shadow maw was no longer a terrifying predator prowling among them. It had become something closer to a very large and exotic classroom pet. Captain Morris finally found his voice. "Should I continue with the lecture?" he asked uncertainly. "I mean about supply chains and resource allocation." Commander Vextar looked around the classroom at his cadets. They were all paying attention, but not because of fear. They were fascinated by what they were witnessing. This human had done something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. "Continue with your lesson, Captain," Vextar decided. Let's see if they can learn while our Shadow Maw takes its nap. But as Captain Morris began to speak again about cargo containers and shipping schedules, the sleeping creature's purring provided a constant background rumble. The sound was so soothing that several cadets found themselves fighting off drowsiness. The Shadow Maw's contentment was making everyone in the room feel relaxed and peaceful. Jake continued his gentle petting motions while listening to the lecture about resource management. He took notes with his free hand while the other maintained contact with the sleeping predator. To him, this was simply how the universe should work. Dangerous creatures were just misunderstood beings that needed kindness and respect rather than fear and violence. News of the incident spread through the academy like wildfire through a dry forest. Within hours, every instructor, security guard, and administrative officer on Nexus Prime knew about the human who had turned a Shadow Maw into a sleeping pet. The story grew with each telling until some versions claimed Jake had wrestled the creature into submission with his bare hands. Dr. Lisa Grant spent the next 3 days running tests on both Jake and the Shadow Maw, trying to understand the biological mechanisms behind their impossible bond. Her findings challenged everything the galactic scientific community thought they knew about predator-prey relationships and interspecies communication. The human's biochemistry shows elevated levels of oxytocin and dopamine, she explained to a gathering of senior academy officers. These are bonding hormones that humans produce when forming emotional attachments. But what's remarkable is that the Shadow Maw is producing similar chemicals. Its brain chemistry has actually adapted to mirror Jake's emotional state. Admiral Torres, the Academy's commanding officer, leaned forward in his chair. The elderly Zephyrian's crystalline features reflected his confusion as he processed this information. Are you telling us that this predator has formed a genuine emotional attachment to a human student? Dr. Grant nodded while displaying her scan results on the main screen. That's exactly what I'm telling you, sir. The Shadow Maw's neural patterns show the same markers we see in domesticated animals when they bond with their human companions. But this happened in a matter of minutes, not the generations of selective breeding that normal domestication requires. Commander Vextar, who had been silent during most of the briefing, finally spoke up. What does this mean for our training programs? We can't use fear-based conditioning if humans simply turn our dangerous creatures into pets. The question hung in the air as everyone considered the implications. The Academy had invested heavily in the psychological conditioning program, using dangerous predators to keep cadets alert and focused. If humans could neutralize that fear response, then the entire system would need to be redesigned. But the implications went far beyond military training. Word of Jake's achievement had reached the Galactic Council through official Academy reports and unofficial gossip networks. Ambassadors from dozens of species were requesting detailed information about human capabilities. Some viewed this development with suspicion, while others saw incredible opportunities. Ambassador Kethlek of the Warrior Caste Hegemony sent a strongly worded message expressing concern about humans' ability to subvert natural predator instincts. If humans can turn our most feared creatures into docile pets, his message read, what else might they be capable of? This represents a potential security threat that must be investigated. But Ambassador Chloris of the Peaceful Garden Alliance had a completely different perspective. Her message praised the humans' unique gift and suggested immediate diplomatic applications. A species that can communicate peaceful intentions to apex predators could revolutionize conflict resolution, she wrote. We should be studying their methods, not fearing them. Meanwhile, Jake continued attending classes completely unaware of the political storm his actions had created. The Shadow Maw, now officially designated as his training companion, refused to be separated from him. When Academy officials tried to return the creature to its holding cell, it had become agitated and aggressive until Jake appeared to calm it down. The beast followed Jake everywhere he went on the Academy grounds. It attended his tactical strategy classes, sitting quietly beside his desk while he took notes. It accompanied him to the dining hall where kitchen staff nervously served meals while a massive predator watched from across the room. It even waited outside his dormitory each night until Jake emerged for morning exercises. Other cadets began to see Jake and his companion as a team rather than a human with a pet. The Shadow Maw had learned to respond to simple commands from Jake and seemed to understand when it needed to behave appropriately in different situations. During combat simulations, it would demonstrate hunting techniques that helped other students understand predator behavior. Patterns. Swift the Centaurian. Cadet was the first to approach Jake directly about his unique ability. "How did you know the shadow maw would not hurt you?" she asked during a break between classes. "My people have legends about creatures like that. We are taught to fly away as fast as possible if we ever encounter one." Jake scratched the shadow maw behind its ears while considering her question. The creature purred contentedly at his touch and nuzzled against his shoulder. "I didn't know for sure," he admitted, "but it just looked like it needed a friend." Most animals respond well to kindness and respect. Unit 7, the Tecton student had been recording their conversation for analysis. "Define kindness in this context," it requested. "My databases contain multiple definitions, but none explain the biological mechanisms you triggered." Jake smiled at the robot's logical approach to the mystery. "Kindness isn't really something you can measure scientifically," he said. "It's more about understanding that other living things have feelings and needs just like we do. Even predators want to feel safe and accepted." Dr. Grant, who had been listening from nearby, nodded approvingly. "Jake's approach demonstrates something unique about human psychology," she explained to the gathered students. "Humans evolved as social creatures who survived by forming alliances rather than just competing for resources. We instinctively look for ways to turn potential enemies into allies. The Academy's other dangerous creatures began showing similar responses to human contact. A crystalline scorpion from Vextar's homeworld that had terrorized students for years became docile when Jake's roommate Danny approached it with the same calm friendliness. A pack of Syrian wolf analogs that had been used for survival training started following human instructors around like loyal guard dogs. Grix, the creature trainer, found his job completely transformed. Instead of managing fear responses and controlling aggressive animals, he was now studying interspecies communication and bonding techniques. The creatures in his care were healthier and more cooperative than they had ever been before. 30 years I've been working with dangerous animals," he told Dr. Grant during one of their research sessions. "I thought I understood them, but these humans have shown me I knew nothing. These creatures aren't naturally aggressive. They're just scared and defensive. The humans somehow communicate that they mean no harm." The transformation extended beyond individual animals to entire training programs. Survival courses that had previously focused on avoiding or fighting dangerous creatures now taught students how to coexist with them peacefully. Combat simulations included scenarios where former enemies became allies through proper communication techniques. News reports began appearing on communication networks across the galaxy. Human trading vessels reported unusual successes in first contact situations with previously hostile species. Exploration teams found that dangerous wildlife on new planets responded positively to human crew members. Even space pirates seemed less likely to attack ships with humans aboard. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to address what was being termed the human factor in interspecies relations. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to discuss the implications of humanity's unique abilities and how they might affect the balance of power in galactic politics. 3 months after the first incident with the Shadow Maw, the Galactic Military Academy had transformed into something nobody could have predicted. The sterile corridors now echoed with the sounds of purring, chirping, and other contented animal noises as dozens of former predators roamed freely alongside their human companions. Jake Collins walked through the main hallway with Shadow the Shadow Maw padding silently beside him. Other students no longer stared in fear but waved friendly greetings to both human and creature. Shadow had become the Academy's unofficial mascot, appearing in recruitment materials and representing the new philosophy of cooperation over intimidation. The morning brought Jake's final examination before graduation. Commander Vextar waited in the testing chamber along with a panel of senior officers from various species. This would determine whether Jake qualified for his commission as an officer in the Galactic Fleet. Cadet Collins. Commander Vextar began, his voice carrying the formal tone required for official evaluations. "You have completed all required coursework and demonstrated exceptional ability in xenobiology and interspecies relations. However, your methods are unconventional, and some question whether they can be replicated by others." Jake stood at attention while Shadow settled beside him with the patient grace that had become familiar throughout the Academy. "Sir, I believe that understanding and respect are more effective than fear and intimidation in most situations." The results speak for themselves. Admiral Torres stepped forward carrying a data pad with the official test results. Indeed they do, Cadet. Your approaches to conflict resolution have achieved success rates exceeding 90% in simulated scenarios. Traditional military doctrine averages 65% success in similar situations. The examination continued with questions about tactical theory, resource management, and leadership principles. Jake answered each query while Shadow occasionally nuzzled his hand for attention. The massive predator had learned to remain quiet during formal proceedings, but clearly preferred being close to its human. Companion Dr. Grant entered the testing chamber carrying a thick folder of research documents. Her studies over the past 3 months had revolutionized understanding of human-animal bonding and its applications to galactic diplomacy. The biological mechanisms are now well documented, she reported to the panel. Humans produce specific pheromone signatures that communicate non-threatening intentions. Combined with their natural empathy, this creates an almost universal language of peaceful contact. Commander Vextar nodded slowly as he processed this information. His original plan to use fear for motivation had evolved into something far more valuable. The Academy has received requests from 17 different species asking for human liaison officers. They want our graduates to help them establish peaceful relations with dangerous creatures on their homeworlds. The test concluded with a practical demonstration. Jake was asked to establish contact with a newly captured Vorthan spine lizard that had been terrorizing mining operations on a distant asteroid. The creature stood 7 feet tall with razor-sharp spines covering its back and arms that could punch through starship hull plating. Jake approached the agitated lizard with the same calm confidence he had shown with Shadow months earlier. "Easy there, big guy," he said softly while keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. "Nobody wants to hurt you." The spine lizard hissed and rattled its dangerous spines in warning. It had been captured after injuring 3 miners and destroying expensive equipment. Every being in the chamber except Jake took several steps backward as the creature displayed its full array of natural weapons, but Jake continued his approach, speaking in gentle tones while Shadow watched from a safe distance. The Shadow Maw seemed to understand that this was its human's moment to prove himself and remained perfectly still despite the potential threat nearby. Within minutes, the spine lizard's aggressive posture began to relax, its spines lowered from full alert to a neutral position. Jake had found the creature's sweet spot just behind its head where the spines were softest. Soon the dangerous predator was leaning into his touch and making a low humming sound that might have been its version of purring. The examining officers watched in amazement as another impossible transformation took place before their eyes. Fear and aggression melted away under the influence of simple kindness and understanding. The spine lizard settled to the floor beside Jake and closed its eyes in contentment. "Remarkable," Admiral Torres said, breaking the silence that had filled the chamber. "Cadet Collins, you have not only passed this examination but have demonstrated abilities that will reshape how we approach interspecies contact throughout the galaxy." Jake received his commission as Lieutenant Collins with assignment to the exploration vessel New Horizon. Shadow would accompany him as an official xenobiology practical companion, a new classification created specifically for human-bonded creatures. The spine lizard was returned to its asteroid, home where it now works peacefully alongside the miners it once terrorized. The graduation ceremony drew representatives from across the galaxy who came to witness the Academy's transformed training methods. Students from dozens of species stood alongside their own companion creatures that had bonded with them using techniques learned from observing human behavior. Swift, the Centaurian cadet, graduated with a crystal scorpion that perched on her shoulder like a living jewel. Unit 7, the Tecton, had formed an unlikely partnership with a plasma moth, whose bioluminescent patterns helped the robot communicate with organic species. Even Reef, the formerly nervous Aquarian, now worked confidently with a deep-sea predator from his homeworld. Commander Vextar delivered the graduation address to the mixed crowd of students, officers, and alien dignitaries. "When we first brought dangerous creatures to this academy, we intended to use fear as a teaching tool," he said, his crystalline features reflecting the ceremonial lighting. "Instead, we learned that courage, compassion, and understanding are far more powerful than intimidation." The New Horizon departed Nexus Prime 2 weeks after graduation, with Jake and Shadow aboard, along with the most diverse crew in galactic history. Their mission would take them to unexplored regions of space where unknown species and creatures waited to be discovered. But now they approached the unknown not with weapons ready but with open hands extended in friendship. Captain Rodriguez, the ship's commander, was initially skeptical about having a massive predator loose on her vessel, but Shadow's calm presence and obvious intelligence quickly won over the entire crew. The creature learned the ship's routines and even helped during emergency drills by remaining calm when chaos erupted around it. Reports began coming in from other exploration vessels with human crew members. First contact situations that historically resulted in conflict were now ending in peaceful trade agreements. Hostile wildlife on survey planets became cooperative when approached by human teams using the techniques developed at the Academy. The Galactic Council established new protocols for exploration and diplomacy based on what they termed the human approach to interspecies relations. Ambassador Chloris of the Peaceful Garden Alliance authored the new guidelines emphasizing understanding over force and cooperation over competition. Jake stood on the bridge of the new horizon watching unknown stars pass by through the main viewport. Shadow lay beside the captain's chair, having claimed that spot as the best vantage point for observing ship operations. The future held countless new worlds and species waiting to be discovered. But now humanity would meet that future not as conquerors or competitors but as friends, offering understanding and acceptance to whatever strange creatures the galaxy might contain. The universe had become a much friendlier place simply because humans refused to be afraid of things that were different from themselves.